Hey everyone, welcome to this video all about self-hosting your own personal data server. Bluesky's been having a moment for the last month or two, which has been exciting. If you've been following along in this channel, I've been sharing a bunch of different details on how Bluesky works, how the app protocol works, and today I'm finally going to show you how to run your own PDS. Now, if you have seen my other videos, you'll know that the PDS is just your server of data. It's where your data is stored. It's whenever you're posting stuff, it's where it actually goes. And we're going to go into a little bit around how that works, but mostly this is about getting you started and showing you how to do it responsibly so that if you actually want to maintain this long term, you can. All of the things I've done in the past with Mastodon and ActivityPub didn't really work out like I thought they would, mostly because ActivityPub is kind of heavy and Mastodon ties too many things into one thing that made it hard to scale and kind of expensive to run. At Protocol and Bluesky, it separates some of those things out. So your data server is different than the things that scrape the data and is different from where people view the data. So if you have a viral post, it doesn't all hit your server. Your server just gets scraped the normal amount that it would if you didn't have a viral post, which is great for being able to self-host it because it keeps the requirements on serving the data really low. So that's the stuff that I'm serving out of it actually doesn't matter all that much on the resources. I don't need a really big instance. I don't need a separate database server. All the stuff that Mastodon needs, I don't need with PDS. And so let's dive into how that works and how we're going to set it up. Now I'm going to be doing this whole thing from my house using a Raspberry Pi. So I'm reusing the IP address that I get from my ISP. So I use that to go browse the internets, and it turns out I'm publicly available on the internets. And that's how the internet kind of works. You can do this from a hosted service. If you want to go get a VPS, a virtual private server from something like DigitalOcean or Vultr or Hetzner, anywhere you want to get something that gives you a Linux server, you can do that. So you can host this on small instances in a variety of places. It'll probably cost you somewhere around $5 to $10 a month. But in this case, I'm showing you how to really self-host it on computers that you may already have. And like I said, I'm going to be doing this from a Raspberry Pi that I have at my house. And it is a Pi 5, and I am going to be using an NVMe drive, but you can do it with a standard Raspberry Pi 3 with an SD card. Some of the steps might be a little bit slower to download stuff, but the scraping and data actually how it gets aggregated into Bluesky shouldn't matter that much how slow your server is where you're running it. The main requirements are just that you have a Linux server somewhere. You can access that Linux server via SSH, and it should be based on Debian or Ubuntu. Those are the distributions that are supported out of the box with the Bluesky, with the PDS install script. So I'm going to show that. You can do it manually with other things because technically it all runs under Docker anyway. So if you know how Docker works, you can run it yourself. But I'm going to go the easy route and just install Raspbian on a fresh install on a Raspberry Pi 5. I'm not going to go through all those steps. There's plenty of tutorials on how to get that started. And again, if you want to do this somewhere else on the public internet, you can do that from a variety of places. I'm not going to show you those parts. Let's just go into, let's say you have a Linux server, you have SSH access, and you want to run a PDS from it. Now what do you do? All right, so you can see it's booting up behind me. I plugged it in over here on my bench. It has network connectivity. Now I just need to SSH into it. But first, let's go ahead and go over the repo real fast and just show you what we're going to do. This is the PDS repo, and it shows you a bunch of stuff on how to set it up and more general details. There is an account migration guide, which again, I'm not going into right now because I'm not going to migrate my main account. I just want to show you how to get this started. We can do another video about migration or backups and those sorts of things later. But this gives a bunch of different things on what ActivityPub is, how to use it, how Bluesky works, and some basics on what you need. And again, 1 gig of memory, 1 core. This is bare minimums for kind of where you're at, and this works on plenty of Raspberry Pis. And this also says you can host up to 1 to 20 users. You can have multiple users on the PDS itself. I'm only doing this for myself. If you want to do it for a couple friends, you can. I also want to say that like this doesn't, the domain where you host the PDS isn't the actual user. It doesn't have to be the user. If you look at the default Bluesky accounts, you do get a username.bsky.social. And that is just a subdomain. It's a subdomain where they host their PDSs. In this case, I'm going to put this as a subdomain on my justingarrison.com website. And so I'm going to put it as pds.justingarrison. We'll walk through that in a minute. But the username I'm going to register is going to be different. It's not going to be pds.justingarrison. Those things are decoupled. So you can have multiple users based on a single endpoint or a single domain, and then you can still change those usernames because that's how this registration works. All right, so my PDS is up and available, and before we even get started, I do have an IP address here that this is what it got from DHCP, but you will want to put this as a static reservation, and depending on your router, there's gonna be a lot of different ways that you might have to do this, but you don't want the internal IP address of your PDS to change. If you're doing this from home, if you're doing it from a web server somewhere on the internet, your public IP address probably isn't gonna change there. You're gonna be paying for an IPv4 address, but in this case, this is my internal network address. So I had to go into my Arrow app and then set up a static IP address, a reservation, just so I made sure that this MAC address of this machine always got the same IP. And I want that for port forwarding later. It also helps with SSH. And okay, let me move a couple things around here in the terminal so it's easier for you to see what I'm doing. As always, the first thing you should probably do is just do upgrades, right? Let's just upgrade the OS, make sure that we have the latest packages installed before we get started here. Depending on your hardware that you're using, this might take a little while. Once that's done, we're going to go ahead and grab the installer script from the repo. And again, this says it supports Ubuntu and Debian. So we're going to, like we said, we're doing a Raspbian based OS. So we should be okay here. And of course we can look through this installer. We can read what's going to happen. I've already gone through it and saw that it does basically a Docker install, and then it pulls down the container image from that. It does a Docker compose, so it has a couple different components that it runs. We'll show you that stuff in a minute, but for now we can go ahead and run it. We will need to use sudo because it is going to do a package install as we go through it. So let's see. In the installer, it's going to prompt us for what we need to do for public DNS. So again, we need to have an IP address registered to our domain somewhere, and I'm going to do this from a subdomain on a domain I already own, justingarrison.com. While this is just waiting for us, let's go ahead and do that in my domain registrar. I'm using Cloudflare for my domains, but most of them look roughly similar. So if you can follow it here, you'll be able to follow it pretty much anywhere. And in this case, I'm going to have some domains for like where does my mail get routed, and some other domains I have set up, but I want to set this up for, and here's actually my app protocol for my Bluesky. My main username is registration, or at least a verification of that. But we're going to add some records here, and we're going to add one for PDS. So we're going to make this one for PDS as an A record, and we need an IPv4 address. And I use ifconfig.me, and that shows me my public IP address. It also shows me a bunch of other information, which are fun. The main reason I actually like it is because I can do it in the terminal too. I can curl ifconfig.me, and it gives me just the IP address. So super handy to have around. We're going to put that in as our domain registration. So that's an A record pointed to my subdomain PDS. And again, doesn't matter what the username is going to be. This is how just we're going to get scraped from the rest of Bluesky. We're not going to proxy that because I don't want to go through Cloudflare. I want to come all traffic go directly to me. And if I go back into here, you also see I need a star.example. So what I need to do is set up a star.pds. And I'm going to use the same IP address. And so anything that's under the PDS domain gets routed to me as well. And that's why all of my user accounts, if I look at, say, if I put a justin.pds.justingarrison.com, that gets automatically routed to my IP address. But I don't want to proxy it like before. And we're going to save that as well. So now I have those two records. They are in Cloudflare. We do want to make sure that they're ready to go, that I can do something with them. So if I dig PDS, justingarrison.com, I should get back the A record for my IP address, which is what I'm getting right now. If that's returning blank or not available yet, you're probably just have to wait a little bit longer. So down here, I can say this is at pds.justingarrison.com. and an email address for where this is going to be registering a certificate so that HTTPS works. And in order to do that with something like Let's Encrypt, you need to have an admin email address that can be sent, emails can be sent to if the certificate's expiring. This is going to do an upgrade and then do a Docker install, get all the required packages, and it's going to start a Docker Compose stack, which has the PDS as one of the options, as one of the containers that's going to run. You can see while it's doing this, it's actually starting a systemd service as well. And so the systemd service is going to be responsible for starting the PDS Docker Compose stack anytime the system reboots. And in this output, we can see, there we go, installation was successful. It gives us a couple things as far as like status on the service, on the PDS, backup my data. This is where it's actually storing my data for whenever I'm posting things. And then there's a command, which is a batch wrapper, PDS admin, which does a couple things for me. The other thing I need to do here is I need to open firewall ports. Because I'm doing this at home, those firewall ports are not open yet. And so I need to point them to that static IP address I assigned earlier. So this Raspberry Pi behind me has a 7.0 address. I need to open port 80 and 443 so they go directly to that box. And now that that's done, we can create an account. And so we're going to go ahead and say yes on this to say create an account for us, enter the email address. Something I need to point out right here is this email address doesn't actually have to be under the domain of the PDS server. This can be any email address. So feel free to use your Gmail account or something else here that isn't related to the PDS. This is just where like a recovery or a validation is going to be sent in the future. Let's go ahead and fill out a temporary PDS handle, which is going to be another subdomain under that. So like I said, we had to set up a wildcard. And now I have a DID placeholder, which is the actual identity in this PDS, and then a password. So I can use this and directly log into Bluesky. Let's go ahead and do it. I'm going to use a private browsing window here so that it doesn't get cookies from anything else. We'll say sign in, and here we're going to say that we have the Bluesky service where they run the main PDS service. We have a custom one, and in this case, I want pds.justingarrison.com. Done, and then a username and password, and this is justin.pds.com with the password that it spit out. We can click before we actually log in. Let me get the logs so we can trail the logs and see what happens. Let's make that just a little bit smaller so maybe we can see a little more information from it. We can click next here, and we see that login happening in the background, and now we get started. We have a user that is able to interact on Bluesky from the Raspberry Pi behind me. That was it. Like, that was literally all the steps needed to get going, right? Here we are. We can get started. We can verify my email. We can send that confirmation email. There's a section here that I forgot to set up in the PDS as I was going through it. So there are 2 optional environment variables here for your PDS as you're installing it. These don't come by default, but you would have to edit the PDS pds.env file with these environment variables. So we're sending an email address from an address, which is, you know, your domain or whatever, and then to an or to an SMTP server, which is how email gets sent on the internet. So these don't just exist for free. Resend does have a free option. I also use a service called MailWhip. I might make another video on how to set that up if you want to do it with something like Gmail. But in order for this confirmation email to be sent, you have to have SMTP working on your PDS, because this email literally is trying to be sent from my PDS, but needs an SMTP server to send the email to. So you won't get this confirmation until you do this step. And now this is a brand new user on this global network. It is available to send information, and anytime I send a post here, if I say test, this post came all the way back to my PDS. It actually got stored literally in the hard drive that's behind me, and then it's available on the rest of the network. So if I log into my main account, then I want to maybe search for it, justin.pds.justingarrison.com. I can try to find people. It's not there. There's something happening here where I can still send information, but it's not being picked up by the rest of the network. And that's where the PDS admin stuff comes in. So I did learn something new after setting all this up, that one of the reasons my account isn't showing up in the search is because the search wants to have full profiles. It's not going to show you without a profile. I waited for days for this account to show up and it wasn't showing up. So I finally reached out and found out that in order for it to show up, I need to have a name, I need to have some profile and things in place. So now if I search for justin.pds Justin Garrison, you can see that it shows up as a suggestion here. It does go for the full site. I did put a name. I put something in my description here. I was testing some video posts and whatnots. And so this is how that side of it works. If you want search to show up in searches, you still do want the next steps of having it crawl your PDS for information and posts. But in order to get your profile to show up, you do need to have some more information set up in your profile before it'll even show up there. Let's look real quick at PDS admin. It does need root privileges because you're calling into a Docker container and Docker requires roots. It does a lot of stuff here. So if I look at PDS admin updates, account list, we can create accounts with an email address and a handle. We can delete accounts based on their IDs. We can reset passwords. And now we can also request a crawl from the Bluesky network. And that's where the main relays are for Bluesky. Again, so my PDS server only stores my data and it gets crawled by these other relays in the network. So let's do a sudo PDS admin account list. And I'll see my one handle here, my one email address, and my DID. And I want to be crawled from the network. So we're going to say sudo PDS admin request crawl Bluesky network. So now it's going to request that crawl, says, hey, I'm over here. I'm a PDS server. Please come find me. Please come find my information. So it gets ingested into the rest of the network. We have to wait for that for a little bit because that crawl doesn't necessarily happen immediately. I don't show up immediately in the network because other things have to happen. But let's look locally at what's going on the server right now. So the first thing I usually would want to do is do something like sudo docker ps. And you can see here, again, this was a clean Raspberry Pi. I haven't done anything else to it. I get this PDS 0.4 release, which is running the actual PDS server. I have Caddy, which is a web server, which does the proxying. Caddy also gets me the automatic certificates. So I get a TLS certificates because Caddy's running in front of the PDS server. And then I also have this Watchtower container. And Watchtower is going to watch the upstream container registries, and then whenever there's an update to one of them, it's going to pull that down for me so that I don't have to worry about automatically updating this stuff on like rerunning the install script or something like that. Watchtower does that for me. Right now, Watchtower does it for all the containers on the box. So if you have multiple things, it is going to watch all of them. I have a pull request as of recording this. I have a pull request to the repo to make it limit the scope so that it doesn't do it for everything if you want to run this on another host that has other containers. But if you want it to be just fully open, get all the containers updated all the time, Watchtower is a great option. And the last thing we kind of want to look at here is what's in this PDS directory. And we can see it does require sudo privileges. It's owned by roots. And I have these account SQLites files. I have the compose file. I have a DID cache. Every user on the system is a SQLite database. On the PDS, every user in the PDS is a SQLite database, and that's awesome. That makes management easier. It makes backups easier. It does so many things for us that we just don't have to worry about scaling it. We don't have to call it somewhere else. You do kind of want somewhat fast disks if you're doing a lot of information, reading and writing, but otherwise it's just going to work for us. And if we look back in my accounts on Bluesky, if I just add the profile, the full username to the URL here, I can find my accounts. I can find the PDS that's running. I can see my post here, and I can interact with it. I can like it, and that will show up for me on the other account here. If I go over my notifications, I can see that like comes through. All the normal things. It's just a normal account on the network. All of that just works. So at this point, the PDS is running. We can send posts and we can see them. All of the normal things of I just want to be able to push things into the network are there. There's 3 more things that I'm going to say we should set up, especially if you're self-hosting this at home like I am. So at my house, I have an IP address, but that can change from my ISP. It's not a stable IP address. If you're doing this in a cloud service and you're paying for an IPv4 address, you're going to get the same IP address and you don't need to worry about this next step. But at home where it's dynamic, you do need to worry about how your DNS records point to the correct IP address. There's a bunch of different ways to do this. You can do it with different services that'll query you. I use Inodyne, which is an open source project, which uses a whole bunch of DNS providers. And so this is going to be another Docker container that I run with a small config file that's going to say where my IP address is and then updates the host for me. You can see in their documentation all of the different DNS providers they support. So if you're using one of these, I recommend Inodyne. Not only does it have a Docker container already built, but it also supports ARM and x86 architectures. So it's really easy to get started. They have an example config here, and the main thing I need for Cloudflare is going to be somewhere down here. Here we go. I need this config, which I'm just going to put in place. First, I'm going to make a API key. So go over to Cloudflare, go under Manage Account, API Account Tokens, create a token. And we're going to say we want to edit a DNS zone. Inodyne recommends also having a read on it. I don't know if it's required, but that's what they recommend, so I'm doing it. Zones, I'm going to say we could do a specific zone, and in this case, it's my justingarrison.com, because that's where the PDS is on a subdomain. And then everything else, I'm not going to filter the IP address because my IP address can change, and that would be a problem. So we're going to continue here to summary. We get DNS read and edit on that domain, create the token. Obviously, don't worry, I'm going to delete this token before this video goes live. And we're going to put that right in this Inodyne config here. So I'm just taking this, again, from their examples every 5 minutes, basically 300 seconds. We're using Cloudflare. This is the zone, is my domain, the top level domain. pds.justingarrison.com is where it's actually going to allow that subdomain to be edited. And so it's always going to call out to ifconfig.me, see what my public IP address is, and then put that in as the domain. You can build this container yourself if you want. They provide a Docker file, but I'm just going to use the basic one that they have, which is going to call out for local directory Inodyne conf and then mount that in and run it. I am going to change a couple things on this, or I want to daemonize this. I'm going to say restart unless stopped, name. So now whenever the Docker daemon starts up again, it's going to automatically start this. It's going to give the container a name, and it's going to be a daemon that runs in the, because it's a brand new Raspberry Pi, I do need to sudo that. And we also need to add the namespace from pulling it from Docker Hub. If I didn't build it locally, I need to provide the namespace. There we go. And now I can sudo docker logs. And you can see here, it's using Cloudflare, it got my IP address, and it updated. And so that's just going to run every 5 minutes in the backgrounds and update my IP address, which is perfect for running something like a PDS at home, where I now get a stable subdomain that always points to my house. The next thing I want to set up is some monitoring. I'm now responsible for this data. I need to make sure that it's available, so whenever the crawlers are going to try to get the data from it, it's available. If you are not available and the crawlers keep failing, they're just going to stop crawling you. You have to go request it again to make sure it's up. I use Uptime Robot. It's a free service for me, for my use cases. So all I'm going to do here is log in. And we're going to set up a new monitor. You can see I have one for my blog that rarely ever goes down, but sometimes it does. So we're just going to make sure that's the PDS doesn't go down as well. Inside the PDS README, they have this endpoint here, this XRPC_health that I'm going to use as where we're going to verify if the service is up or not. We're going to do PDS justingarrison.com XRPC_health, and that's going to validate when I curl that. If I go here and actually look in my terminal, you'll see I get a JSON back with the version that I'm running. And that's all I need because I get an exit code 200. So this is going to make sure that it's working. PDS, just name it. I'm just going to do push notifications on the mobile app. The mobile app works pretty well for me. I allow it to have notifications. I almost never will see the email, and even the text messages and voice calls I may not get. So I'm going to get the mobile app push. That side of it is free. This is not affiliated. If you want to sign up, I do have a link down below. And we're just going to check this every 5 minutes. That's good enough for me. If I need it less than that, I have to pay for something. But I don't really, doesn't matter too much to me. Again, because the architecture of Bluesky, all of the data is already available in that view. It's cached up there. This 5 minute, if I have a downtime that's causing something to not query my PDS server, that's usually okay. It's just new content. I can't log in, that sort of stuff. So we just wait here for the first successful health check, and I can see that it's coming through. If I go back into the PDS server, I can also look at the logs for it. And if I grep for health, I'll probably see it query it there. So I can see here's one of those requests coming from Uptime Robots querying that endpoint. So it just validates that they're actually doing it, and things are working as they should. The last thing I'm going to set up here is NetData. NetData is a monitoring tool. It's not giving me alerts necessarily. It can, but I like Uptime Robot for simplicity. NetData is going to give me more metrics about what's going on. So I can see if I'm getting a spike in memory or CPU usage or something like that, or even my disk is full. NetData is going to give me that. Uptime Robot's just going to say, hey, is the service available? NetData is the other side of it, where it's like, once something's a problem, I can see historically what's going on. In order to do this, I'm going to log into the NetData console. And again, this is another free account. You get 5 nodes for free under the community edition, and that's plenty for what I need. And so I'm going to use the standard Docker CLI here, and it's going to do a bunch of stuff because it's monitoring the host below it. So things like host networking and a bunch of volume mounts. You do need a token, which is why you have to log into it to get cloud reporting. You can run NetData without the cloud reporting. It just runs locally, and you can just hit the local API. You could have Caddy reverse proxy it, that sort of stuff. I'm using the cloud just because it's convenience, and I don't have to do it that way. I am going to switch this over to, let's do the stable builds, copy that, and I think I see in here there's a restart unless stopped as well, so I don't need to worry about it not running again. So let's do sudo and then paste in that giant command and run this locally. All right, now it's running. Let's see. I see now we have NetData, we have Inodyne, and then we have Caddy, PDS, and Watchtower. And again, Watchtower currently is going to keep all of these images up to date. So if any of the Inodyne latest or stable get updated upstream in Docker Hub, I'm going to get those images immediately. Watchtower will get those pulled in. So in NetData, I can now see this node. I can log into it, and it is a lot of information. NetData has everything all in one place, and so it makes some things really nice to be able to just kind of view it, but it does give you a little bit of history, which is what I usually like, because if I get a ping that something's down, I want to come in here and say what caused this downtime, and NetData gives me that view pretty well. The last things I will say that you should also do is automatic OS updates. There's plenty of tutorials out there on how to keep Ubuntu or Raspbian up to date automatically. You can set up a cron job and get security updates, because again, if you're running this, you are responsible for this. It's not just about freedom of being able to have my data, it's also about being responsible for that data. So you want to protect it as well. So do automatic OS updates, and then also do backups. Make sure a backup is stored off of the system. If you have an NFS store or something else, you can back up even just your SQLite databases for the PDS server would be good enough to be able to get your user data out of the system so you could restore that somewhere else. So those are the last two things I would say that you would want to update. I'm not going to give an opinion on how I think those should be done, but you should do those things. And finally, if you want to get a custom domain on your user, because again, I don't want that full subdomain, you can check out my other video. I'll link it down in the show notes on how to actually get a custom domain, because I don't have to have the full URL. I can use any of the other domains I own with just a text record setting up in Cloudflare. So that's it. I hope you found this useful. If you're running your own PDS server, leave me a comment. Let me know where you're running it, how you're running it, if there's other things that you found are interesting or tutorials on how to use it. I'd also like to do a video on how to transition your account, because I have my justingarrison.com account, which is a hosted PDS, and I can move my data out of the hosted PDSs onto my personal one, but I can't go backwards. And so until I figure that side of it out on making sure that everything here is stable and I know how this works and I can back up and restore in case something happens to the hardware, I don't want to lose all that data. So I'm making sure I'll do that in a different video just to make sure that all this work isn't for nothing. I want to be responsible for it. And as a sysadmin for a long time, I know what it's like to lose data, and that sucks. So if you're on Bluesky, give me a follow, justingarrison.com, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.